Hey everyone, welcome to Wytchcast, a podcast for the outcast. Today's special guest we have Marshall from Witch of Southern Light. How are you doing today?
Hi, thank you. I'm doing really well. I am Marshall, which is Southern Light, Marshall WSL for my pen name. I am a Texas queer witch, an author of Cunning Words, a grimoire of tales and magic, and soon to be author part number two with The Red Mother, Cunning Words collection part two. So I'm really excited. That one's coming out October 1st.
Yes, I'm so excited. I actually, when you came out with your first book, I was like, immediately have to, because I've been following Marshall. They actually have a podcast with another good friend of ours, Austin Fuller, if you're listening. Love you, miss you, Gorley. And then also, but it's on Spotify, I believe, and a couple other platforms.
It's pretty much on every major streaming platform.
Okay, and it's is it Southern Bramble, I believe?
Southern Bramble, a podcast of crooked ways.
Yes, definitely check it out. I think you guys are what, 4 seasons in now?
Yeah, thank you for the shout out.
Yes, of course. I gotta support my girly girls. But yeah, no, awesome. And like I with your book, literally, like I for me with reading is a little challenging. Like I'll read a little, then I'll put it away, and then I'll read another book. But honestly, your book, like it felt so easy to like sit there and like read and like the stories, and it's really cool because like the with the stories that you have, it's not like it's a grimoire, but it's not just like a book of spells. It's like the stories in
Right.
themselves have the magic in them. And just like if you like in my brain, like as I was like listening and like in my own way of like the word like just the way that it was spun, I don't know, like it felt it like I felt like I was there, like with like a lot of the characters that you brought into this world. Like I felt like I was there with them, and I could feel like the heartaches, the trials, the tribulations that they went through, the magic that there was spun, and they all were all woven together. They're like individuals. It seems like individual stories, but like each chapter, it was like, oh, like these characters are like, oh, that was from the last chapter. Like, you know what I mean? It was almost like a I don't want to quite say like an anthology, but sort of. It kind of gave me just like a smidge of like that anthology vibe.
Oh, it definitely is. You know,
Okay,
mythology is itself just a collection of stories, and they can connect together. They may not.
right.
Um, and I think that's actually one of the things that I think is so fascinating about, as an animist and some being connected to the landscape and literal world around us as a witch. The the landscape itself is connected in massive networks under the earth with like mycelia and the
Mm.
roots and the life forces that live underneath that feed off of one another that recognize when one needs more water, when one needs more nutrients, when one is dying and they need to cut themselves off to save the community. There is a network of mycelia and animism that is all talking to each other all around us all the time. And I don't think that our stories are that disconnected either. I think even though each and every one of us are living individual lives, there's so many experiences that we all share. And as witches or as queer people, we share many of those experiences. And I think that's why some of these stories may feel sometimes more individualistic until you see those strings connect.
And that's literally like as I was going through, like that was perfectly well said. Like as I was going through the book, I was like, this literally like each of those chapters, even though like you said they were like individual, it was like I just saw the strings like being woven through this like beautiful book. And also too for those that can't see, I will have the video up for you guys on YouTube. So I'll just show you guys what the book looks like. I have a copy of it right here, The Cunning Words by Marshall. And I literally, when I read books, like I have to follow along. I like write and or underline and all it or highlight. So literally, like doggy ears, like literally all through the book. So like it's my way of like being able to follow through, but also um like understand like what's going on, especially because of the magic that's woven into it, like being able to like even incorporate some of that magic into my own craft myself. So that's just wonderful. I really do appreciate that's a beautiful book, beautiful book.
Well, good. I'm so glad it's adaptable for you.
Yes, also I appreciate it. And like the also too because I love I mean, I'm curious about your perspective on, because we're going to go back into
Hmm.
these questions. The queer experience.
Yes, let's do it.
Yes, the queer experience as a witch. There, a lot
Hmm.
of the stories in the book very much had queer undertones. And I've read many wonderful, amazing books on witchcraft and just like to get inspiration, etc. But I didn't really like a lot of them don't have, even though I personally think witchcraft in of itself is queer because it's so odd and out of the ordinary. But as far as like when it comes to like the way that you spun it in your book, like you really did bring those like the people, the characters in the book very much like they were known to be like queer. So I'm just really curious more about that and like how like you wove your experiences into that for your book for as a queer person yourself.
Well, I feel like a lot of these fantastical stories and fantasy stories and myths, there's a lot of older myths that absolutely have queer stories. Literally, the changing of one's gender, changing of one's human body into another one, or a different type of animalistic experience altogether. So, in the history, like deep, deep, deep in the annals of history, we have some of these queer stories. But at the time, it was almost just so it wasn't so separate, it wasn't so othered. So I feel like in the past, several thousand years, a lot of those stories did eventually become so othered. You
Mm,
didn't really have fairy tales that had a romance between two men. You didn't really have a lot of stories or folklore that shared that very individualized trans experience. Um,
mm,
Non-binary is a new term,
mm,
but it is an ancient experience. And so I wanted to kind of bring that into the awareness of the stories that we tell, the stories that inspire us, the stories that create the myth that we work with in our magic, that we pull from, that we source power through. Um, it was really important to me to start seeing myself in these stories and not just having to adapt them to me.
right, exactly. And that's like I've heard many like authors say like I like they create the book that or the art or whatever that they wish they had when they were younger or little, or like like they want to see this. So it's like, but we didn't really have like we had the representation, but it wasn't so like modernized. It wasn't like boom, like right there, like on TV or in the libraries or and things like that. It was very kind of like hidden, like sort of in a way where like now we're seeing more of it. It's very apparent, like even in your book, like you make it very, it's not like a hidden thing, like it's very like boom, like these are queer characters in this book. And I don't know if you feel the same way of like like you said, like being an author or being like a queer witch author that you maybe didn't get to see a lot of that maybe in your upbringing, but now you're like, let me write the book that I wanted to see, like that I maybe didn't get back way when, or like was it like, was it Buckland's book?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Buckland's
yeah.
Complete Book of Witchcraft.
Yes, exactly. So just like authors that I mean definitely paved, like Cunningham and like they all
Hmm.
paved the way for a lot of us like in this generation. But now I feel like now this generation, we're getting older, we can now kind of be like very like here it is, and not like kind of try to find it in there. You know what I mean? It's like boom, there it is. Yeah. So I love that you did
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
As human society, we're always evolving, and
Mm,
progress keeps progressing. So,
yeah.
like, we will continue to find language for feelings that we feel we have. We will continue to always find ways to express. And I do think that what was available to me when I was a kid is very different from what's available now, which is amazing and fantastic.
Mm.
Um, One of the things that really stood out to me was so many of the stories I grew up with as a queer kid. I came out at age 13.
Yes.
And yeah, and I feel like so many of the expressions of queerness in media and stories. I read every book in my high school library that had the word gay in it. I went to the computer, typed up the word gay, homosexual, queer. I typed in those words in every single book that popped up throughout those 4 years. I read all of them. There weren't that many. There were enough, funny enough, for me to at least have some reading material. But at the same time, so many of these stories were so traumatic.
Mm.
They were tragedies. Mind you, I mean, it was reflecting the time. It
Hmm.
was reflecting the experience. That was coming out of the 90s into the early 2000s. The stigma of AIDS and HIV was still so deeply affecting all of us. Every story that came forward that was powerful enough to make it to mainstream tugged on your heartstrings, broke your heart. It was. I will say it's probably very good that it for so many people it humanized our experience in a way that many cishet people probably didn't have in their face. The
Yeah.
thing is again, as we evolve, our stories aren't all tragic.
Mm-mm.
Not all of our stories were always tragic then either, but uh, I wanted to see more stories that were about queer joy, that were about queer experience, that were about queer expression with just existing, not having that be the plot point of the story. Some of them will. Some of them that's just who the character is. Like that's not the point of the story.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. And it like you said, like the tragedy that I think there, I mean, it's the drama, the tragedy, but I think through it, and I know
Hmm.
we've experienced now that we're coming through Pride Month and now we're in July now, I think
Hmm.
being able to understand like what is pride and and especially as a queer person and like what that looks like and what it looked like then and what it looks like now and like why I think the big thing is like why we have it. I've been seeing a lot of like, well, why isn't there like a straight pride? And I'm like, well, I think in and of itself, that's like self-explanatory. Like,
That's traffic.
yeah,
That's traffic.
yeah. I'm like, it's like I get it, but I also see like why we have it's like for especially for a younger generation like that are like coming up to like they may not know why we do pride. They just see like the parades and the confetti and the drag queens and etc. And that's wonderful and we love that. But it's also like where did that come from? Why do we do that? And that's
Hmm.
that I think really reinforces the roots, I feel like, for the queer community in general. And I think it really helps to know the why and understand, and the education behind it really reinforces that to continue for generations on after us. I think it's really important for queer people, especially younger queer people, to understand that. Yes, have fun, be as queer as you can, like on those days, do the parties, etc. But also understand like why we have that, like who helped pave the way. A lot of trans people and drag queens like really helped like pave that way for it to be more acceptable, especially like in a heteronormative society that we have. So and
Hmm.
being brave, and I think being brave in that, especially as a queer person, I don't know if you feel the same way, but like being brave isn't so much like it just I don't want to put it in words. Like being brave is like it's okay to be scared, but the brave part is like doing it because maybe either no one else is going to do it, so you're like, well, I'm going to do it, or just having that
Hmm.
like that fear in the moment, but then just like being like, you know what, I'm going to wear that dress, I'm going to wear those lashes, I'm going to put those heels on, those nails on, and like it doesn't, and if people laugh, they laugh, like it doesn't matter. Like that to me, even though it's like terrifying in the moment, it's like being and expressing those queer parts of ourselves, I think is so important because it's a self-expression, but it's like also to be able to like you know be you and then be authentically you, and like and also be you in the world and not have to like hide
Hmm.
it. Of course that's situational, not every place is safe, but with cautionary understanding, like that bravery comes through and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna wear those nails, I'm gonna do that, and
Hmm.
bam. So I don't know if you're
Well,
very
brave.
yeah. Oh.
Well, I was going to say, bravery isn't the absence of fear at
Mm.
all. In fact, it's actually included in the definition. Bravery is being afraid and then making the choice to do it anyways. It's very synonymous with having courage. You're afraid to do it, but you still make the choice because that's your conviction.
Perfect word, conviction. Perfect word, like to be convicted to just do it anyway,
Hmm.
yeah, that was well said. So I was curious, and when you came out as a queer person, did
Hmm.
you have like what was your support like? Was it your family, your friends? Was it a lot? Like, did you just like welcomely, like, boom, everybody accepted you? Was it not so much? Like, how was that for you?
I will say this right now, I'm very privileged. I grew up in a family that was um, had kind of a mixed bag of opinions about things. Uh, I came out at age 13. I was watching an episode of Mad TV with my mom, and I literally couldn't hold it in any longer. And I just looked at her and told her, like, Mom, I think I'm bi, which is a very common thing for a lot of us to do in the beginning when we're testing the waters, especially back in the like 90s, early 2000s. And she just started crying, and she was just like, I was just like, oh no. And she goes, I'm just so glad you finally told me. And it was, it was one of those things where um, she had had lots of warnings. I was a swishy kid. I loved to play with Barbies. I preferred all my girls friends were girls. I was playing with her hair and makeup ever since I could. It was just one of those things where I had all of the um, very stereotypical traits as a child, to the point where my mom would warn my dad, and he was just like, we don't know these things, we don't know, it's way too early to think that sort of thing out, right? But when I finally came out, it was after multiple situations where she had confronted me, like, I've noticed you've been watching this movie a lot. What about it? Is it something that connects with you? That was Tu Wong Fu. Thanks for everything, Julie Newmar.
Love that movie.
There was another movie that I stayed up super super late for so I could record it on my own like home recorder VHS, called Common Ground. Came out, I want to say, in the late '90s, and it starred Brittany Murphy, Jonathan Taylor Thomas, and a couple other um, sort of known actors. But it was three stories throughout time of people coming out, coming to terms with their identity, and I would watch it in secret. And I
Mm.
remember one day my mom came up to the upstairs to the media room to be like, "What are you watching?" And I was just like, "Oh, just a movie called Common Ground." And she saw like a couple people that were like on normal television stuff at the time, and she just kind of walked out. She must have gone online and looked it up, because that was when she was like, What is it? What is it about this movie that you just find, that you just enjoy so much?" Because I was watching it on repeat. It
Mm.
was it was like the catharsis that I got watching these people come to terms with themselves, because I hadn't yet. Um, but I knew, and I started coming out to my friends. I came out to my girlfriend that I was bi, and she was like, me too.
Oh.
And we literally only ever held hands while also kissing, her kissing a girl, me kissing a boy, in one of those, like, truth or dare moments or whatnot. That was the extent of our relationship, if you want to, if you, which is kind of funny to think
Those-
back now. But at the same time, when I came out to my mom, she was supportive, but everything was new.
mm.
Every single idea or thought she had as a parent didn't go out the window, but all of a sudden she had needed to question things. I would always able to be able to spend the night with my friends who were guys, because that was appropriate.
Mm.
You don't spend the night with girls, even though all my friends were girls, majority of. Um, and all of a sudden it was just like, I don't know what rules are appropriate here anymore. I don't know, because eventually it was just like, oh no, yeah, I'm totally gay. But she had to reorchestrate her brain about what was the social niceties, the expectations, the ideas about what was appropriate, what was inappropriate. I asked her, what would you think if I brought home a boyfriend? And she goes like, I don't know. And I said, well, would it be different if I brought home a girlfriend? And she was just like, I guess not. Like, these were things that
Mm.
she just hadn't had the, not the mental capacity, because that's not the right word. She was having a lot of new life experiences, but she never wanted to make me feel like any of those life experiences that she was coming to terms with needed to affect me.
Mm.
Especially as an adult, I can look back on that now and know how much she rethought. So many times she tried to be a good parent, and may have actually kind of participated in the pain I was experiencing. I remember when I was very young, she walked in on me painting my nails clear, mind you. And, she sat down and she goes, Marshall, because I was a very bullied kid. And she was like, Marshall, this is why, some of the kids are making fun of you. They're calling you gay. And I can see in her mind how she thought she was trying to do something to protect me.
Mm.
But in that very moment, I was kind of like, wow, even my mom says so. Like, it was just one of those very formative memories that I haven't really talked with her about in a while, but I I think that that's probably one of the many things that went through her head years later, when she thought, did I my son's life harder because I tried to form him into the way that would make him the most safe. Um, yeah. So it was a mixed bag of things and experiences, I would say. Uh-oh, Justin, you froze. We're still recording though. Maybe you'll come back. Uh-oh. We'll do a sweaty smile. Ah, good, you're back. That's okay. And it's still recording. Great. Wonderful. Perfect. Okay. I'll start from that story. Um, my mom walked in on me one time in my bedroom and I was painting my nails clear and I could tell she wanted to protect me as my mother, but at the same time, she went about it in the way that she didn't realize may have been hurting me too. She sat down and she said, Marshall, this is why you're getting bullied. Things like this are what's giving people the power to call you names like gay. And it was very much like I know what she was going on in her mind trying to protect me, but at the same time, in the process, she ended up participating in that. Um, you need to stop doing the things that you love so you won't get called these names. Instead of, why don't we address the people calling me these names? It was very much like, well, maybe if you hadn't worn that, you wouldn't have gotten those googly calls. So it it was things that I know like that she looked back on when she had to reorganize her brain about how to be a good parent to a gay son. And I think a lot of parents now, especially as millennials are coming into being, you know, parents, I do think that they are coming into it with a very different experience, with a much wider scope of what they expect their children to be. I think we came from a long line of families who basically, especially in America, who looked at their children as legacies, as extensions of them. And I feel like we are slowly breaking so many of those centuries old cycles that our parents are seeing us as individual humans so much sooner. They're giving us that voice, and I'm very, very privileged to have the family that loves me then and now, no matter what. We can have a lot of really open conversations. It's kind of fun. I make jokes with my granddad where he says something like, I don't know. He was talking about one of his guy friends. He was like, "Yeah, he's a real straight shooter," and I'm like, "I wouldn't know what that's like." And he just kind of bursts into yeah, he just kind of bursts into laughter because he's not prepared for like gay jokes where I'm making them, but also being gay is in the butt of the joke. Laughing with versus laughing at. That's new for a lot of straight people. That's new for a lot of heteronormative people. I think that's actually a really beautiful thing, especially when I see like gay or straight comedians make gay jokes, but gay or trans or queer people, they're not the butt of the joke. They're a participatory partner in the joke about something, and I think that that's such a it's a fine line, but it's one that I think we are walking much, much closer towards as a society now. Oh, yeah. Mhm. 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 You know, it's kind of funny. I remember being a small child, like early, before I even discovered that witchcraft was a real thing. I remember being at my great grandparents' house in like Roswell. It was Roswell, New Mexico, and they had an herb garden in the back. And I just remember taking like I remember having like a styrofoam cup and some warm water from like the machine that you could get cold water or warm water from, and putting parsley in there and mashing it up with a spoon. And me and my sister would do this, and my mom would be like, "What are you guys doing out here?" And be like, "We're making potions." She's like, "Oh," and they had a pecan tree that we would add pecans to from, and it was just, I remember these very specific memories of always being, one, extremely interested in witchcraft. I've always been drawn to the imagery, the identity, the archetype of the witch. So when I was in sixth grade, about 12 years old, 12 to 13, because that was the time period for that, I believe, I think. um, I did. I discovered Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, followed by Teen Witch and by Silver Ravenwolf, and all of Scott Cunningham's books. And these things became so intrinsic. How can I rephrase that? I became obsessed. I would go to the mall every weekend, and I couldn't even buy some of these books right away because, I had lawnmower money, and and I was afraid. I was afraid to bring them home. So I literally would go to the mall. My mom would drop me off at the bookstore, and she'd go off and do her own thing. And then I would stay there for the entire hour and a half while she's shopping, and just sit there and read these books and look at them until I finally saved up enough to buy one, bring it home, and hide it under my bed as long as I could. And then I'd do it again and again until I had this collection of all these books. Um, I was obsessed. Very, mind you, this was the 90s. This was the time period that Wicca and witchcraft were synonymous. If you were doing anything outside of what was prescribed in 90s Wicca, you weren't a witch. That's the other path. We don't do that. Threefold law was universal law. Lord and Lady was it. It was still at the time considered by most practicing current pagans as an ancient pre-Christian religion. It wasn't until I was much older that I learned a lot of the history, the Margaret Murrayisms, the facts behind the facts, if you will. We know now that Wicca is not an ancient pre-Christian religion. We know it's inspired by many pre-Christian ideas and cultures, as well as co-Christian cultures. We cannot forget that. That's actually really big, especially because a major part of it was inspired from Gerald Gardner by Aradia, by The Golden Dawn, by Aleister Crowley, which had a lot of Christian and even Jewish mysticism all mixed in there. So you have ancients, you have news, you have redirecting these things into a whole new religion. But again, I digress. At the time, that was what spoke to me, especially because it was for the first time I ever saw someone who was raised in a Episcopal church, a, let's just say, Catholic light, diet Catholic, if you will, um, Catholic light, uh, someone who was raised in that, always being repressed, always knowing that I can't be too feminine, always knowing that uh, people were whispering about me that I was, oh, that's Kim's son. He's the gay one. We think he hasn't come out yet. We don't know. We'll see. You know, it was such a repressed place for me to grow up in, and this was the first time that I saw spirituality that was saying your femininity is beautiful. The goddess is feminine. I mean, the idea of literally a goddess alone for me was revolutionary. So that really connected to my queerness before I even knew I was gay. I'm telling you, this is sixth grade, right? 12 years old. Um, it was a time period that I knew I was a witch before I understood the depths of my own queerness. And it was actually through that I was able to embrace it a lot more. Um, I moved very, very small in very, very small steps towards these ultimate, formative moments in life experiences of coming out, of knowing who I was, of taking that step to tell someone how you feel. I had a best friend named Kiara. Wow, I forgot about this so long ago. I remember she invited me over to help hang out with her while she was babysitting. Mind you, these were infants, so they were asleep. We were just hanging out and we were talking, and she said something where she just goes, I don't know why you won't just say it, why you won't just say it out loud. And I don't know how we got to that point in time, but I think we were talking about something close to, let's just say, adjacent to gayness. And I think she was just kind of fed up. She was actually from Canada, so she had a very different idea about gayness, I think, than us Texans at the time in the early 90s. But at the same time, still, she was like, I just don't know why you won't just say it. And this is when I was about 13, 14, and she, maybe before then, actually, no, it was before then. It doesn't matter. And I just said, because if I say it out loud, I can't take it back. If I say it, it cannot be unsaid, and it would ruin everything. She goes, what do you mean? And I said, it would ruin everything. I want to be a husband. I want to be a father. I want to have a family. I want all these things. And of course, I was 12 years old, 13 at the time. So these were things that I thought were what my successful future was going to look like. And if I came out, if I said aloud, I'm gay, all of that goes away. I lose everything. You have to understand at the time, I couldn't adopt. I couldn't get married. This was not a feasible thing to look forward to and say, I could have that one day. And if I said those words out loud, I am gay, that meant that everything that I thought I wanted was gone. And that's a really heavy weight for a 12 or 13-year-old to have to come to terms with. Um, Yeah, that's a grief that we shouldn't have to be feeling at such a young age, and alone. So when I finally did, it was a bell that couldn't be unrung. But I will say, once it finally was, things started to change. I started to become more happy. I started to become more authentic. I hid less. I was honest more. It was like being bound in a corset so, so, so tight that you are used to feeling like you can't breathe until you start to loosen one string at a time. And that one string gives you that first breath that you're just like, oh my God, I haven't been breathing for years. And then more strings and then more strings, then finally you take it off and you're living authentically. It's a beautiful experience, but man, is it scary to lose that. It is an unbinding. We we have to understand. Yeah, absolutely. This is the 90s, right? 90s and early 2000s. This is a time period when there's no gay marriage, there's no gay families. Um, I was in the suburbs. I was in a privileged white cis family. Like, I came from a very specific group or societal understanding that this is the proper way to be a successful person. Of course you want to have kids. Of course you want to get married. You don't want to be alone. I wanted to have that great love that I saw in all the romance stories. I wanted to, we all grew up with, I don't know, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. We grew up with Disney movies that literally had only the continuous story over and over and over again about a prince and princess being saved. These were all stories that we all thought were the epitome and be all end all of stories. Um, I think that actually goes back to why I wanted to write some of the ones I did, is because they didn't make that the point. They didn't make cis heteronormativity the societal expectation. They didn't make that the norm. Um, I wanted that to exist into the world, so I had felt like I had to write some of it. But at the same time, that was something that I wouldn't say it was put on me by my parents in general. I would say that was something that was put on to me as, to be honest, it's probably a class thing if you want to get really honest here for a second. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. 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 And and discovering witchcraft, especially at that young age when I wasn't sure where I was yet, who I was yet. It was interesting because I felt so powerless. This felt like it was the first time I was touching that opportunity to re-empower myself. And I do think when it comes to witchcraft, whether you're queer or not, especially, and this goes, I think, really, really big with the history of misogyny and patriarchy. Witches are generally associated with women in the first place. And there's a reason for that. There's because of the way that misogyny has pitted women as other, as lesser than, as inferior, and the way in which women have either sought aspects of magic, of folk magic, of spiritualism, of mysticism, of the occult to re-empower, to get that power, to take that power back, or even worse, the way that men have used that as an accusation for women when they finally do come into their own power, when they get their own voice. I won't say that there's an even comparison between queer people and women whatsoever, because there's lots of intersectionality there. But I will say that as a queer person, I feel that there's a similarity in the aspect of I felt so disempowered, I felt powerless. And I think many of us, as witches, as practitioners of magic, we come to it through a place of needing. Uh, of needing that aid, of needing that help, of needing something bigger than us that we maybe not feel like we have the power to accomplish or achieve. Um, it's a very empowering thing, and I'll tell you right now, getting into witchcraft and building a spirituality, um, There were multiple times throughout so many of my formative years that I used spellcraft here, that I used magic, that I created and did rites that really rearranged aspects of my formative years. Uh, this is so silly, but I remember like I wanted to ride home the bus with my friends. They were in a neighborhood separate to mine. I was over here. I would literally ride on their bus and just walk an extra block over to mine. I thought it wasn't a big deal. And I had a horrible bus driver who was super, super rude. I mean, this is super juvenile, right? But at the same time, in uh, uh, Silver Ravenwolf's Teen Wolf, in Silver Wolf's Teen Witch, she had a spell called Bad Bus Driver Spell. And so I remember like, I'm going to do that. And so obviously there's enough children in the world and teens who felt like they had a shitty bus driver, right? So, right. So I cast the spell. Nothing happened. The next day I came home from school. I did it again. Nothing happened. The third day, I went all in. I went like full on sky clad. I'm talking about like in my room, parents away, shouting to the skies with my casting circle and casting spell and whatnot. And it was so crazy. By the next week, there was a rerouting of the entire bus schedule. They started combining and changing where different neighborhoods were going to be redistricted for the bus schedule. And I and my neighbor's bus got put into one. And I was now with their bus driver, and my old bus driver was reassigned with someone else. I mean, it's truly wild, but that's like my first, that was one of my many first major confirmations. And that's just like a small one. I did a couple other things I'm not that proud of. I did some things I'm very proud of. But again, like I said, it was about taking back the power when I felt I didn't have any. Absolute desperation. I'm gonna get really real here. This is desperation. Yeah. I was desperate for something. I needed anything. And to be perfectly honest, I think this goes hand in hand with folkloric witchcraft in the first place. Traditional witchcraft, folkloric witchcraft, um, history of trial records. These people who may or may not have actually turned to it were desperate. They were oppressed. They were marginalized. They were living the edges of society. They were in land disputes. Like these things were about power imbalances, and for me it was a power equalizer. Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. I would say that's a huge um, attraction, if you will, to magic and witchcraft, to folk magic. I don't know where I'd be without it. I will also say, and this is honestly a very real, honest truth. I wasn't shy about it. I walked around all my classes with my book set on my desk. Like, I didn't care about being secretive. And to be perfectly honest, in a small suburban town, kids got scared. Kids talked. And I'm not saying that, I love being feared. I actually didn't like that because it backfired on me on multiple occasions throughout my teen years. But at the same time, there is I don't want to say there's a power in the knowledge you have of knowing you're a witch, because that's a little egotistical. But at the same time, like some folks will think twice. Some folks, especially if they're a little superstitious or they come from a religious family, will think twice before fucking with you. Um, I don't know if all those kids feel the same way as adults, but I will say uh, there were multiple times that parents would call in concerned, or kids either didn't really want to hang out with me anymore. There were some that like all of a sudden did because they were interested. It was a very interesting mixed bag. Mhm. Mhm. Yes. Mhm. 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 So here's the thing, I wanna be brutally honest about it. At the time, it was better being feared than being bullied. I wanna make that to be I was young, my experiences were limited. It was better to be left alone than it was to be picked on. It was better to be ignored than it was, to get the attention. Now I was getting the attention in a different way, and sometimes that was fun, and sometimes it really wasn't. But at the same time, it moved the chess piece in an unexpected direction that made a lot of others not sure how to play, if that makes sense. And to be perfectly honest, I'd rather them just not play with me. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. I would say they're very intersectional. You have to understand, I think that witchcraft is queer by nature. And by queer, I want to be very clear. I don't mean specifically gay. I mean othered. I mean odd. I mean strange, off the beaten track. Um, there are a lot of different types of life experiences that are going to be considered queer. Um, that doesn't, again, always mean gay. Queer is a very, very overarching term, that a lot of people who live on the edges of the normal society, who feel marginalized, who feel oppressed, who have something intrinsic about them that makes them not always fit within the expected normalcy, if you will. By nature, that's where witchcraft lives. By spirituality, witchcraft is a very liminal thing. It's about crossroads. It's about the other world. It's about really finding and reading between the lines. My book is called Cunning Words because the word cunning comes from the word to know, knowledge, gnosis. These are things that aren't necessarily presented in traditional, normal, everyday reality. There is a separateness, I think, about being queer, about being gay, about being trans, about being bi, about having an experience that just makes you somewhat separate from the box, that I think people feel that we as a society should be in. That's where witchcraft is. So as when I say it's intersectional, I mean they're kind of indistinguishable from each other. Um, my witchcraft is very queer in the way that it presents itself, um, because the spirits that I work with are so androgynous. I live in an area of my city in Texas called I call it the Gayborhood. I'm surrounded by a history of gayness, of pride, of death. I live in a building that was built in 1985. When I moved in, I met this really kind gentleman. He was in his, I want to say, probably late 50s, early 60s. Um, and he told me about living in this building since it was there, and he said like, oh, that's where so and so used to live. He died in 1985, and then that's where so and so used to live. We used to date briefly, but then he cheated on me with so and so over there. I mean, like, this is an old building that had a lot of queer joy and queer desires and love and lust, but also death, sadness. There was, I believe, a couple of apartments where meth was being cooked for a while in the 90s and early 2000s. So, like, this building alone, let alone my neighborhood, is it's a crossroads of queerness, and I very much feel as though I'm surrounded by these spirits, who are participating in my practice all the time. So for me, it's hard to separate my witchcraft and who I am as a gay man, because I am surrounded by it constantly. Hmm. Oh yeah. Well, I think a lot of modern and ancient religions that are centered around a patriarchal hierarchy of monotheism have led a lot of queer people into paganism. I want to get that really specific. Witchcraft, yes, but paganism by far, yes. And you can be a pagan witch, but you could also be just a pagan and not a witch. I actually know several gay men who are deeply devoted to Pan. I know another one who's deeply devoted to Dionysus. Do they do magic or spellcraft? Not at all. But the way in which they live their lives according to their spirituality is so much more supported. It's so much more thrilling, honestly. I think uh, for them to come to a spirituality that is embracing of our queerness. So I think again there's a crossover there between paganism and magical practitioners and witches. Hmm. Hmm. Yes. No, I think that's a. I mean, I've spoken to some people who say you can be Wiccan and not a witch. I think if that's the case, it means you're just following more of like the wheel of the year. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure how you can be a traditional Wiccan, and that means an initiatory initiated into a coven, Gardnerian, Alexandrian, Saxon. Uh, um, there's a slew of initiatory Wiccan practices. Gardnerian being the first initiatory. It is a closed tradition. I want people to understand that Wicca is traditionally a closed practice. I don't think that enough people understand that because so much of modern Wicca and solitary Wicca has been completely made available to us through so many authors over the decades. Um, but it in itself is a religion. Absolutely. It's an individualized religion. It is not centralized. So one coven may have a different expression of it than another. But traditionally, when it comes to Gardnerian, the majority of the Gardnerians will have the same structure. The majority of the Alexandrians will have the same structure. When each individual witch from the coven goes off onto their own solitary practice, because every coven witch also has a solitary practice, things might look different. They may have their own patron deities. They may have a separate spirit court, if you will. I have my own spirit court that is much more closely aligned with traditional and folkloric witchcraft. Hmm. Well, my personal spirit court is made up of a quadrant of familiars that are associated with the crossroads and the sacred directions, northeast, southwest, as well as the four elements, fire, earth, water, and air, as well as connected to like the witch's devil or the witch father, witch mother, witch queen. That's my personal spirit court. I call it a spirit court because it is somewhat of a hierarchy. Um, Part of the spirit court is my queer dad, my queer ancestors, my witch ancestors. So it's when I say a court, I mean there's the witch's devil, there's the witch's queen or mother. Then there's the four elements, the four familiars of the crossroads. Then there's the mighty dead, the grander dead. I don't know them all by name. Um, and that includes my queer dad, my queer ancestors, my witch ancestors, the witch dead. Um, there's actually something I've worked on in the Red Mother that's coming out in October called Red Inscriptions. I haven't talked about this yet, so this is kind of exciting. There's something called Red Inscriptions, and it involves a story that invokes our witch ancestors. It calls upon them to be invited into our practice, into our craft. Many of our witch ancestors were not witches. They were people who were accused of being witches. Whether you want to call them witch ancestors or not, they were othered. They were placed into a horrifying decision that ended their life, or a position that ended their life. I think they're hungry. I think they want revenge. I think they want to live. I think they want to live through many of our experiences, and I invite them to be a part of my practice, my craft. I created a very specific rite that can be used in magic to give voice, to call upon their power. To all those who want to be involved in this, I am using these red inscriptions to invoke them, to actually not invoke them, to evoke them to help with what I am doing. I'm excited. Like the red inscriptions. Why red? So, the book's called The Red Mother, and it's inspired by the folklore and history of Old Mother Redcap. Old Mother Redcap actually has a concrete history and then a much more grander general history. There were several women, there are several stories actually, and I won't get into too many details, but that were known to be local fortune tellers, charmers, cunning women. One of them specifically wore a little red cap. Um, her parents were accused of witch. I believe this happened in Camden. Her parents were accused of witchcraft and were hung. She was kind of ostracized from society. She ended up making a name for herself as a little charmer and local fortune teller. Um, and she ended up kind of being this nefarious and infamous woman who people would might go to if you need to get rid of your husband because he was abusing you, or you might. And she was also kind of a poisoner. She had multiple men in her life who would die of mysterious happenstance. And she was even accused once, but then was set free. So we have this history of this woman, and I do have her name written in my book, so I want to go. I want to keep light on the details, but at the same time, that little red cap became so infamous that it became a common term that your local cunning woman would be called, "Oh, old Mother Redcap," and it became a common idea that you might wear a red cape, a red hood, a red shawl that would separate you to make sure that the townsfolk or villagers understood that's old Mother Redcap. If you need her for this or that, you can go to her. Or the medicine is not working that the doctor is doing. They've been bleeding me every week and I still haven't got rid of my my common cold. And then you go to old Mother Redcap and she put together a collection of herbs and certain compresses or medicines from her apothecary, and she might say a little spell over you and send you home. And maybe that was the thing that actually did it, because the bleeding wasn't doing it. Right? Sorry, leeches are not going to get rid of your syphilis. Um, not going to happen. Truly. Jeez. But so this term, Old Mother Red Cap, became so popular and common. When I was first introduced to it, it was Gemma Gary's book, The Black Toad, and it was used as an organizational tool. The Old Mother Red Cap, Old Mother Green Cap, and Old Mother Black Cap were three big chunks of the book that separated out how this book was going to teach old West Country English charms, magic, spellcraft. And the first one, Old Mother Red Cap, was a collection of literal spells and charms. Old Mother Green Cap was a collection of herbal magic, healing magic, herbal and tree lore. And then Old Mother Black Cap was a collection of bindings, curses, and hexes. And I was so intrigued by this. I read it over and over and over again. I was obsessed with the art. Gemma Gary is a prolific writer, and I'm so blessed to have come across her work. But I felt when reading these that there were stories there. And it was the first time I was inspired to write stories about them as individual witches. And that's how the stories came together in my book, Cunning Words: Our Mother in Red, Our Mother in Green, and Our Mother in Black. Our Mother in Red, her name was Belinda in the book, but that's not as important as what she represents, what she does. She sort of just shows up when you least expect it, when you might need someone to help you. She kind of reminds me of like the witchy fairy godmother for Cinderella, you know? Although it might be a little bit more vengeance on the stepmother and stepsisters if it were the Red Mother. But even after I finished Cunning Words, I knew there was still so much more, and I was inspired to continue her stories. And that's how the book became The Red Mother, that's coming out in October. Um, Red has an association with witchcraft through red string, red thread. It's a long history with using red thread and folk charms and magic. Sewing even a little bit of red thread in your clothing hidden somewhere for protection. Doing knots with thread to tie the winds up so you could sell them to a sailor, and then when you're on sea and you have no wind for your sails, you would untie one of those knots and let the wind come in. And of course, Mother Red Cap. So you have this history of red, but then you also have to remember some of the most obvious things. Our own life force comes in a liquid red form flowing in our veins. Uh, Red is the color of carnage. It is the color of blood. It's the color of partially death. It's the color of birth. It is the color of a lot of things that we experience at pivotal, transformative moments in our lives. And so there is some blood magic in here. That's actually like a huge part of my own personal craft. Not like being some dramatic bitch and just slicing your hand over an open fire, just like a little pinprick here and there. Ugh. I'm like, do you know how bad that's gonna hurt? How long that slice is gonna take to heal? That's on your open palm. Any girl, anyways, right, so red has a very, very powerful energy to it, and I think it's really associated with magic, with spellcraft and charms. Yeah. Yes. I'm a big believer in, like I said before, power rebalancing. I think that I have no issue with hexing whatsoever, with cursing, um, when I like to say when it's necessary, but I'm not here to judge you. If you're just throwing around, baneful magic willy-nilly, I think that's a little irresponsible. That's kind of like waving a gun. Um, so the way that I see it as practitioners of magic, we have to keep that in mind at all times. And even the spells that we do that are helpful for others and ourselves could have baneful reactions. We'll use the most common and obvious one that we hear all the time. You wanted to cast a spell to get a job. Great, you got it. That means you might have gotten the job that someone else did. That person may have a family. That person has bills to pay, and the magic that you used to get the job made it to where they didn't. Um, that doesn't mean that a job spell is baneful magic, but I think a lot of people really misunderstand that even with the best intentions, the outcomes that we get may be exactly what we asked for, but it may have some unforeseen consequences, maybe not for you, but for other people. Um, so when it comes to hexing, I have done it. I've done it in ways that it was not justified. I have experienced backfires during those things. I've also done it in ways that people got exactly what they deserved. I did one years ago. I mean, years and years ago. I recently wrote about it in my diary. And um, it was an ex of one of my close friends, and things were getting really nasty. And there was a big friend schism, a split in our group, me and him against them. And I finally got so bad. This is the beginning of social media bullying too. So it was like 18, 19 years old in the MySpace days. It got really, really ugly. I had to change my phone number. So you know, I said, like, do you want me to do something about this? And he was like, yes, and I'm going to join you. And so I remember it was like midnight on a Saturday, and we went out to my parents' backyard because I still lived at home then, right? And they had a little chimney out, well, a big chimney out there, and we put some wood in there. We light a fire, and I took a picture that I printed out from one of their MySpaces of all three of them, and I don't remember the entire spell, but I remember very specifically looking at the picture, saying what we wanted to envision for each of them, and then for each of them spitting on it, and then throwing it into the fire. And I'm sure there was a chant we might have done, and we may have done an opening invocation somewhere similar to something we saw in the craft. But you know, we were angry, we were livid, we were disgusted, we were through. And every single one of those directives came to be. Um, One of them I feel a little bit guilty about, but at the other point, on the other hand, it worked. So yeah, and I have to live with those consequences. Every action has a reaction. Mhm. Well, as I say, it comes back to power imbalance again, doesn't it? Like, if you find yourself in a position where you have exhausted every mundane means of righting a wrong, and you really don't have any other choice, that's where magic comes in. Um, that's where we go to that place of desperation. That's where we say, "That's it. I have nothing left. I'm getting the book. I'm getting the book." Right? Get the book. Book. Mhm. Mhm. Plays a huge part in the magic that we put out there. A lot of times when we are casting spellcraft of any kind, um, the need for it in the first place is the first aspect of putting that foot forward into the other world with a purpose. That's the intention. You know, we've heard those sayings like intention is everything. And it's not, just if you're listening and heard this for the first time, it's not everything. But the reason that phrase gets thrown around a lot is because if you don't have a clear intention, if you don't have a clear reason for why you're moving forward in the direction you're moving, why you're taking the actions you're having, if that intention isn't set or clear or understood, to be perfectly honest, the spell is going to match that in its answer. Um, and I think when you have that need, when you have that emotion, that distraughtness, that desperation, I think that's deeply felt by the spirits we connect with in our craft. It's like they're responding to it in kind. The ones who feel it are the ones who come. Mhm. 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 Yeah, it's interesting. I had a situation once where someone from my Patreon came to me and was asking for help for a I'm gonna be very, very vague here, so I just can protect identities. They asked for help because they had a very close friend who was going through a custody battle, and they wanted to and they were hoping that he didn't want to lose custody of his child. I think it was he wanted to get custody. Um, but the thing is I don't know these people. I don't know their situation. I don't know what happens behind their closed doors when they're in a private family situation. I don't know about the relationship between the parents. I don't know about how they treat that child. And I didn't feel comfortable giving advice or specifically because I make sigils for if you're in the top tier of my Patreon, if you come to me and you would like to have me personally cater and create a sigil for you in a specific situation at the top tier of my Patreon, I'll do it as many times as you want, whenever you want. But I wasn't comfortable doing that with the information that I had. So instead, I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a sigil that basically leans into the safest and most successful outcome for the child because it's all about the kid. Honestly, that's what it's about. And if the case was that it truly is best to have equal custody between the two because they're both wonderful and loving parents, then that's what would happen. I did find out that later on, I believe that he ended up with equal custody. So that's great to hear, which is wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. But at the same time, I'd have to look at the history. I just remember that I got a positive feedback from that, which is wonderful to know. But at the same time, sometimes as service magicians, when people come to us with these things, uh, we also have that ethical aspect of ourselves to ask us, like, listen, when it comes to the emotions and need I'm putting behind something, if I can't connect to that need, what need can I connect to? And that's when I decided to go with the need of the child to have the safest home to be in, to have the best and most successful childhood based off of the parents that were going to raise them. Hmm. Hmm. Oh, oh, absolutely. The majority of magic that I do for people are people that I know personally. I know the stories. I know the truth of what's going on because I was either there and witness to it, or I know the person that I'm working for. There are a lot of other people out there who are service magicians, like Mahigan, Kitchen Toad. There's Austin, my I know, me too. There's Austin, my podcast co-host. You know, they have to really take in all the information before they choose how they're going to go about doing what they do. A lot of, and they sometimes will get to know and have relationships, like friendships with some of these people. Um, they'll use divination if they need to figure out the best way to go about something. Uh, I don't personally take on that job as a service, but I will say that's something that is part of my Patreon that I'll give advice to or help with or top tier make a sigil for you. Yeah, so a sigil is a magical glyph. It is a symbol that represents a larger statement of desire. There are many ways that this can come to be made. The word sigil is ancient and old, and there are different types of sigils throughout time that carry meaning and represent something larger than them. Um, and then there's a lot of modern sigils that we as practitioners will create. The most common method being the chaos method. So that would be where you write your statement. You may remove all the double letters and vowels, and whatever letters are left over, you'll rearrange and to create a symbol. And in chaos magic specifically, that symbol needs to be worked on, and there's a couple different ways you can do that with a very kind of set it and forget it method. But then there's also the spirit model, and I lean into the spirit model. As an animist, the sigils that I create are almost like little servitors. That is their name. That symbol is their name. It can't be spoken aloud, it can only be drawn. And to conjure them and bring forth their spirit is to activate that sigil, to maybe burn it with with a candle, or to carry it with you as a talisman, to draw it and stare at it and focus on it. There's also, of course, the infamous cum sigil, which is all about the power of orgasm. So it mainly a sex magic, exactly. A sigil. I actually wrote a whole poem in my book, Cunning Words, called A Climactic Sigil, that teaches the power of using and creating the cum sigil. Um, but you can use these in your magic, and they become really powerful symbols. Sigils are my most used ones, I would say. Sigils are really, really big. I'm a really big lover of amulets. So like I'll create a charm bag or a little spirit house or amulet that has a collection of spirits in them. So there might be a sigil for my desire. Then there might be several herbs that are connected to those virtues. I might have some minerals that are connected to those virtues. Uh, then on top of everything, I might actually whisper a very specific incantation into it and then close it up tight to lock it in. So that would become one of my most common magics, because then I would carry that around with you, or you hang it by your door, or you bury it in your yard, or you keep it in. If it's for better business, you keep it in your desk at work. There are a lot of ways in which those can be, but I think sigils are probably part of a collection of what I like to work with. Hmm. Burn. Hmm. Yeah, it's cool. Witch bottles. So there's a couple different documented through history, like you said. One of the first iterations came from, and we were actually just talking about this with I was just talking about this with Austin for our protection episode coming out on Tuesday. Uh, the concept would be, I know, please, exactly. So the concept was, it was documented that this cunning man told a woman who believed that she was cursed uh, by a witch nearby, that she needed to pee into a jar and then put that, you put like nails and pins in there maybe, and then put the jar by the fire. And the whole point was that the curse was attached to the urine, and the urine was which held the power of the curse, would be attached to the witch who cast it. So by putting it by the fire, you are going to start bubbling and boiling and causing that witch who cast it on you to start feeling the pain of supposedly a full bladder without being able to. And they have the choice at that point in time to remove the curse from wherever they are, or if they don't, the idea would be that by the time the bottle bursts, the witch and her bladder would burst. Basically, it would turn back on her. And supposedly, in some of these written documents, the concept of being there was an old lady the town over who died the very next day, and so it was believed that she was the witch who cursed this person. And so there, it's kind of like a return to sender sort of spell bottle. And then there's the other really common one, the witch bottle of protection. And these are actually being dug up all over North England right now, which is really cool. You can even see some of them on the Antiques Roadshow. And there was this European charm where you would take a bottle and you'd pee in it, and every single member of the household would put like some fingernails, some hair, some toenail clippings, whatnot, maybe some broken glass, some nails or pins, and then they would seal it with wax and bury it in their yard, put it up their chimney, somewhere basically where it would almost be built into the foundation, but it would act as a decoy. So if anyone were to send a hex your way, send a curse your way, any baneful magic your way, now instead of going to you, it's going to go to your witch bottle and it's going to get trapped in there and it's going to get locked in those pins. It's going to reflect back on itself in that glass. It can't get out. It's stuck. And so we've been, doing a lot of home renovations in America over the years. In the process of digging up old platform, or old New England homes, especially from like the 1700s and 1800s, we're finding these bottles in the foundation. It's really kind of cool. What is this? Well, this is where things get kind of funky because back in the day, that was considered anti-witchcraft. It was it was anti-witchcraft. So to make this bottle would actually be usually the advice of a cunning person or a tradition passed down by a family, because that's something that was done within their family. Um, these practices were actually about protecting you from witches. When a time Mind you, this is also during a time period when a lot of words like a white witch or a black witch might be used, especially over in England. That was just a very common term. A white witch might also be a wise woman or a cunning person, and that was just the language that they used to describe the type of practice they would use. And they would always be afraid of this malefic witch. The thing is sometimes it wasn't even like a person living amongst them in the village. It was this like monster in the woods that no one had seen, but obviously it's living in there and it's going after you. So, it was a very mythic and folkloric sort of concept. So like a very inhuman or monstrous spirit or being. And so these things were actually just considered modern folk protections for them at the time. They were anti-witching things. Now, in the modern day, they become more of a regular practice of traditional witchcraft. The concept where, hey, listen, I know I piss people off. I know other witches. I know other witches may not like me. And honestly, you and I have put our face on our screen, we're public. We've put our face out there. We've got social media. I've got books written. I've said some things that make people mad. I've got to protect myself. Hmm. Oh, yeah. Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, you can find me on Threads, on Instagram, and on TikTok at Witch of Southern Light. Check the link tree in all of my bios. I have tons of free resources in there. Buy my book, Cunning Words, A Grimoire of Tales and Magic. You can get the black and white, the hardcover color, or the ebook on Amazon. I'm a self-published author. So none of that money is going towards a major publishing or traditional publishing company. Like when you buy it, because I published on Amazon, you're supporting me as an artist and as an author. My book two, The Red Mother, is coming out October 1st. Um, Thank you. If you are an occult or metaphysical shop and you want to carry my book, Cunning Words, in your store, it's also available on the Ingram Spark catalog. So you can carry it in your store at an extremely cheap wholesale price. And also, I am doing a book signing. I'm super excited in Salem, Massachusetts for Salem Folklore or Witchcraft and Folklore Festival. The festival will be August 14th through the 18th, and one of the class days I'll be in the Hawthorne Hotel doing a book signing. So definitely check out those in-person events. That's available in the uh, uh, link tree in my bio, as well as I'm actually really excited. This is the first time I'm doing a class based off of my book, Cunning Words. I'm doing a class on July 28th with the Order of Chaos Magical Academy on the subject and the old ones. So definitely check that out. You can sign up in the link tree in my bio. Yes, Southern Bramble, a podcast of crooked ways. I always forget something. Oh, I love it. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.